Okay, welcome. So we are talking about the physiology of stress. And we were talking in the last one, we ended up talking about the vegetative level or the lizard brain, which is the most primitive part of the brain, very instinctual, very in control of involuntary systems, especially moving information from the brain to the body and the body to the brain during the stress response system. Also, very much involved in coordinating movement needed during the stress response system so you can fight or fly. So, hopefully, that makes sense. And also, remember, I do have these 2-minute neuroscience things for different parts. This was the last one we talked about the midbrain and how important dopamine is into helping us coordinate movement. Um, and I have another 2-minute neuroscience thing for the substantia nigra, if I'm saying that right. Okay, so now we're moving on to the limbic system, and I got one for the thalamus as well here. Got them for several of them. The thalamus is above the midbrain in the brain's central region. So remember, it's the thumb part here. And I've talked a little bit about it already. It's a relay station, the gatekeeper for sensory input, except olfactory. Any of that information coming into the brain from sense organs and traveling to the appropriate cortical areas for conscious processing. So before those sensory stimuli go to where they need to go, they come through the thalamus, which then releases them as the gatekeeper, determining what needs to be perceived by those systems. It amplifies what matters so it gets through. So the bang against the window, and filters out what is irrelevant. So keep in mind, you got an air conditioner that might flip on in the night, or maybe even like a door. Oh, you have a partner or something like that, or a kid. And you know that the door might go open. Those kinds of things might not be important. They're just regular noises. And what's really going to be important to it is going to be novel noises, right? It might be something that could that you're not used to, that or extra loud or something. But it's enough to get through. Has specific nuclei for hearing, vision, taste, muscle, and skin senses, and pain. So that's our thalamus. The hypothalamus, and I have another one of these for the hypothalamus. Very important little piece of the brain here. Sits below the thalamus. They're very close together. Responsible for regulating and controlling many systems in the body, especially those involved in homeostasis and the release of hormones. So it's a big part of our endocrine system as well. It's involved in the motivation to move for food, drink, rest, aggression, sex, basic movement. So it's going to, we're going to notice thirst. It's going to help us notice thirst, notice hunger, notice that we're sleepy, notice that we're, worked up, that we need to move in order to do those things. So it regulates a lot of those systems. It activates the autonomic. Remember, that's the fight or flight part of the nervous system. Nervous systems, or it activates the fight or flight part of our autonomic nervous system. Influences the brainstem to activate the internal organs and prepare for fight or flight. It's gonna raise the alarm in a way. If something has gotten through, something is thought to be of danger, then the hypothalamus, when the alarm is raised, the hypothalamus is one of the first to go into action, raise the alarm in the body. Connects to the pituitary gland, which is called the master gland, and stimulates the endocrine system to release fight or flight hormones. We'll talk more about the endocrine system in a moment. It stimulates the secretion of androcorticotropic hormone, ACTH, produces antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin. We're going to talk about these. Stimulates thyroid to produce thyroxine. Controls appetite and body temp, and it's sensitive to both fear and anger. So you notice our appetite decreases when we're hot or worried. So the hypothalamus, because it's in control of both, like making us aware of our thirst and our hunger and our emotions to some extent that are going to make us move, and controls our body temp. These two things can become interrelated. So anger tends to rise when we're hot. We see that aggression can be worse at those times of year and in places that are especially hot. It monitors blood nutrient and volume levels, which influence thirst and hunger, regulates our circadian rhythms for rest and arousal, and again, involved in motivations. The hypothalamus is huge when it comes to especially regulating all of these systems that are going to then play a role in our fight or flight response system. We'll talk more about it. The amygdala, got another little video for that one. And I've talked about it some. It's an almond-shaped structure. It's made up of 12 subregions, scans the world and asks the questions, is this okay? And assigns value to stimuli, both positive and negative. It gets the rep for only being about anger and fear, but it actually is about all emotions, but it does assign value to the stimuli. And the ones that stand out because of that negativity bias to some extent are going to be the ones that say, no, this isn't okay. And so it gets that rep a lot. It mediates the fear and anxiety responses. It does store memories for easy reference about what should be avoided and approached. So interesting to say it stores memories because memory tends to be more constructive than stored. We have to reconstruct memory based on all different kinds of stimuli, areas in the brain. But emotional memory, or how we respond to things that activate our fear or anger, do get a little bit stored, but it only stores it on partial information. That's why it's like when you see the long, skinny thing in the periphery of your vision walking down the trail, and you react really quickly, assuming it to be a snake before you've taken all the information in and really looked at it, because the amygdala, has this kind of, this is what we do when we come across a snake kind of thing. And it does help us react really quickly when things are of danger. Of course, we can come to those really quick reactions about things that aren't really dangerous, and that's when we get into trouble with it. Said to have a back alley entrance for the thalamus. I said that's an amygdala hijack. Hijacks our reaction because it reacts much, much quicker than the thinking brain, much quicker. Those with higher levels of anxiety may have larger amygdalas, we found, which means they're more reactive. Things in the brain that are bigger are used more and tend to be, so it would be overreactive to some extent. The right amygdala said to be more connected to our body state awareness. The right side of the brain is very in tune to non-verbal stimuli. Our body state awareness is very non-verbal, so it gets information really quickly from that part of the body. From the body. Responds faster than our thinking brain. All right, so also in the limbic system, we have the hippocampus, which is right near the amygdala. Comes from the Greek word for seahorse, because it's shaped a little like a seahorse. The hippocampus, very involved in memory. It encodes long-term memory, events that can be narrated. So things that you want to remember need to activate, or things that you are going to consciously remember, like facts and dates and names and places, have to activate the hippocampus. And to activate the hippocampus, you have to pay attention to them. What gets paid attention to gets remembered. This is one reason that emotional things within a situation tend to be remembered more than just sometimes details and facts, because we pay attention to things that arouse our emotions. So it will turn things from short-term or working memory into long-term memory. It's involved in spatial and contextual memory. So what that means is it's very involved in when and where, or especially where things happen. So studies have shown that, like, I think it was in London, taxi drivers in London have very large hippocampi because they have to be able to map where everything is. They have to have the context of place. And that's very much about the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus tends to be smaller in those with PTSD. That makes sense if you think about the idea. You've maybe heard, people with PTSD will confuse context. So a soldier who has PTSD from the war might react to fireworks or to backfiring of cars because the hippocampus is misfiring in a way, confusing context and place of sound. It works with the amygdala in encoding emotional memories. It's connecting context to emotion. Must be activated for memory to encode, remembers what is attended to, and emotional moments are given heightened attention. So I talked about that. All right, the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex. It's a curved structure at the top of the limbic area, bottom of the prefrontal cortex. So if you look at this, we have the limbic system here and the prefrontal cortex like here. It's going to be right back in there between the two. So if you think about it, it's a little, it connects those two parts of the brain, the emotional and the thinking. So the ACC is very important in mediating these two. Helps coordinate several functions: focus, attention, registering a bodily state such as pain, and social states such as rejection. So it's pulling information from the body, from the emotions, from the mind, and integrating and coordinating a lot of those functions. So if you think about that, what we remember is what we attend to and pay attention to. That, of course, is going to have to do with attention. And that is what then what cognition is gets kind of wrapped around, what our awareness becomes wrapped around. And it may also play a role in self-identification. And so I say that because there's another part of the brain called the insula, and it has a mapping of all the organs in the body. And it's very near the ACC. And there are cells called spindle cells that have been found in both the ACC and the insula. And there are more of them in humans, the most in humans. And then they're also found in animals like elephants and dolphins and the great apes that have kind of passed self-recognition tests, meaning they recognize themselves as separate selves. And then other animals don't have them. So there's this idea, this part of the brain is also very, so it's tied to our social. The middle of the brain is very much our social brain, and it's very tied to our social processing centers, which are going to be about rejection and what we pay attention to and those emotions and how we bring all of that information together kind of becomes a place where our social understanding becomes focused and pulled together from all these different things. Okay, so I'll just do the neocortex because I think I only have this one slide on the neocortex. Processes sensory information, so it has all of those sensory information centers to determine if it's a threat or non-threat. Now, of course, if we're going to think about a threat or non-threat, that takes a little more time. It's the seat of analysis, imagination, creativity, logic, memory, organization, very, very higher order things that we see. They're more complex in the human species. I'll get, I'm an animal lover. My animal loving students will say, animals can think too and so forth. I would just say that everything within the human brain has more complexity. There's more subtleties that we know of, at least, right? And it is all located, much of it is located in this neocortex. And one of the big things when it comes to our stress response system is that the neocortex can override our emotional responses. So we want to have connections between that prefrontal cortex in our limbic system that can help say, hey, calm down, calm down. And that is what we strengthen when we apply mindfulness, some of these practices that we do. We're working those parts of the brain that are going to allow us a little more control over those maybe hyperactive stress response system parts of the brain. Okay. So I'm going to stop here and I'll come back and finish up with the nervous, with these different parts of the nervous system.